Peace and love. My name is Devine Carama. I am the director of One Lexington, and I would consider myself a dedicated violence prevention advocate.
Whoa. And
What?
an Emmy Award-winning musician, my man.
I got a few bars.
Well,
I got a few bars.
I look forward to hearing them. And I'm Sam Stockley, a former professional footballer, coach, and now I'm very fortunate to be the sporting director at Lexington Sporting Club.
That's what's up, man. Glad to be here with you too, man. Glad to be here with you, brother. But we got to take a hard look in the mirror, right? When it comes to domestic violence, it is clear we can't keep expecting women to solve the problem. I mean, that's a bit like asking people of color to solve racism. Men are victims of domestic violence, but the vast majority of survivors are women. Men's abuse of women has different dynamics. The abuse is overall more severe, oftentimes fatal. The societal response, the impact is different. I just think it's time for men to step up and address the issue.
I totally agree, Devine. We want to pull back the curtain and create a space where we as men can finally talk about the most pressing issues facing our communities with mindfulness, open heart, and a lot of respect, okay? It's about talking honestly, listening intently, and getting real and doing the work we need to do to challenge this.
That's what it's about, man. I'm excited.
Yes.
This series is produced for the City of Lexington's It's Time initiative. It's called the Good Guy Guide.
The Good Guy Guide?
Not because we're the perfect examples of good guys, but I just feel like, we got to be clear. But I feel like if we wake up every day and try to be the best version of ourselves, that's what being a good guy is about, right?
All you can do and all we try to do, It's all I've learned to try and do as well. So whether you're here to learn, to reflect, or to join the conversation, we welcome you, open hand, open-hearted, right? Yeah. We're here together, striving to do better for ourselves, our families, and the community.
That's what it's about. Welcome to the Good Guy Guide. Let's get it started, my brother.
Do it.
Peace and love. Welcome back to the Good Guy Guide. It is me and my brother Sam today, and we are excited to be joined by some wonderful guests.
Yes, indeed. Can't wait.
Well, look, let's just jump right into it. We got David Cozart and Chris Begley. David is the Chief Visionary Officer and founder of Commonwealth Center for Fathers and Families. David, good to see you, brother.
Good to be seen, brother.
Lovely to meet you, David.
Likewise.
And Chris, lovely to meet you. Chris is an archaeologist, professor, journalist, and author, all working right here in our hometown at Transylvania University.
Good to see you, Chris.
Good to see you.
Well, look, this entire series is about discussing changes that we need to make within ourselves to live up to what it means to be a good guy. But what needs to happen on a community level? How do we act as genuine allies to women and create a culture of respect and equality for all? What does that really look like from day to day out in the world? And why don't more men engage conversations around this topic? So Chris, let's start with you. You've been called the modern day Indiana Jones. So let's dig deep and uncover some truths here. What does our community need to do to create a culture of respect?
Well, I think really it does start with the individual. And I think that if we look at what we need to do collectively, part of it is that it has to be intentional. It doesn't just happen. You can't just think, I'm going to be a good guy. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to try to create this situation that's fair and equitable. You really have to be intentional and make that happen.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it just doesn't happen. I mean, power flows the way it's going, and it really takes some effort to divert it and to change the situation. So, one thing I think, one way to start would be to think about where does the inequity lie? Where is it that we want to make some changes? Are you talking about things like, I don't know, if I'm thinking just about gender, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Is it something where we want to think about that in a new way? I mean, we're all familiar, right, with these discussions about, non-binary and different ways to think about these sorts of things. That might be one place we start and say, is there a problem with how we're thinking about things? Second thing might be to decide, what are the real world outcomes of some of these inequities, and who do they really hurt? Because, I think a lot of us think that if it's not fair for everybody, then everybody suffers. You don't get away with treating people like that. Eventually it comes back to get you. So I think partly maybe the first thing to do would be to just sort of recognize that or think about those things sort of in that way.
Okay. And I'm thinking this as well, and not to hopefully steal any of your thunder as we pass it to you, David, but then I'm also thinking who needs to be at the table when we start to build that structure for us to be intentional about. I know the last time you and I saw each other, we were sitting in a room discussing inequities within the art community, right?
That's right.
And there were artists present. So I'm thinking, is there a listening piece? Do we need to bring women to the table and open our ears first? Right? Right. And I'm gonna come back to you. All right. But David, just the same question for you. What do we need to do community-wide? We're doing the work within, obviously, I think all of us here, but community-wide, how do we transition that out and see more of the work we're doing on the inside out in the community?
Yeah. I like what my brother said, that in essence sounded like to me that we're not all well until we're each well. And until we're seeing everybody as assets, we'll never see them as equal or equitable.
Yeah.
And so it starts with that for me within the individual and their personal ideology, that they understand that we are a sum of our parts and that we all are in the same boat, right? And that intentionality cannot be reached without acknowledgement. I think acknowledgement is the first in any journey that we're seeking to make individually or corporately in a community. So our community has to absolutely acknowledge there have been inequities as it relates to women.
Yeah.
We know that evidenced by inequity in pay with women with the same education or more, and in comparison to men, how they get paid less. We know that also in reference to, positioning in organizations. And so until we first acknowledge that, we won't make progress. If we act as if it does not exist, that's the first step in recovery. That's a first step in my faith walk. That's a first step in my strategizing at my organization.
Yeah.
And it's a first step in me making better myself and a community for any population. So just acknowledging that. We ain't gotten it right to this point in this country.
Yeah. And I didn't mean to cut you off earlier. I didn't know if you wanted to finish your thought.
Well, your question about should women be at the table? Yeah, that's who should be at the table for sure. And that's there's listening is of course a big important part, but that's not to say that you put the onus of coming up with changes on the group that has been disadvantaged. Or everybody has to participate in this. So conversations among men are also appropriate, but not unless there's also a lot of listening going on too, because, there, in my imagination, I could come up with what I believe the inequities are, with what I believe the problems are. But I don't have the same experience, even though I have a wife, I have a daughter, I have a sister, I have a mother. I still haven't sort of walked in those shoes and felt it in the same way, and you have to understand that. So that would be, a big part of it there was to listen to what are the problems. I mean, some of them are obvious when you're talking about domestic violence or pay inequity or anything like that, but it undoubtedly is more nuanced than that.
Yeah. I think what I hear both of you saying is probably where I've kind of stalled out, if I'm being honest, because I'm trying to do that work within myself, because I'm even noticing those shortcomings with me. So how I interact with my wife, my daughters, right? I'm doing that work. But I've become, until doing this podcast and content series, stuck right there. You know what I mean? And not purposely, but I'm struggling on how do I transition from this work that I'm doing personally, because it is so personal, because I know people have their different ideologies, right? I'm trying to put the medicine in the ice cream, maybe dancing too much. But at what point do you all think, and how, and maybe that's something we can figure out in this conversation, saying, but how do you go to that next level, or how have you all been successful in communicating that to the community, to make the community better, to see them do the same work?
Again, I think these conversations are fantastically mind-blowing in some ways, because listening to you gentlemen talk about it, and the position in your articulating it is fantastic. I come from an area where I think actions, like we've said, speak more than anything else at this moment in time. So if I relate that into my world, or my small little bubble at the minute that we're in, is, you know, we've just launched a professional soccer football club, however you want to talk about it. Okay, but side by side to us growing the men's program was our women's program. So I've been very fortunate in the executive rooms and conversations where it was, whatever we do for the men, we do exactly the same, if not more, exactly the same for the women. So there's no difference in how we do anything. You know, what we did for the men's pro team, we've now got a women's pro team. What we did for the boys academy, we've got a girls academy. What we do for the youth boys, we do for the youth girls. So in the world that I'm in, everything now is equal and aligned, and our CEO is a female, fantastic, brilliant leader. By bringing the women's game, has created more female jobs and opportunity, and that was the strapline for the USL Super League to come. They wanted to provide more opportunity for female executive, female players, female coaches, female everything. And now, from my experience in it, you're having this amazing workflow of two professional teams running side by side, but with real exceptional people, male and female, trying to collaborate and work together. So I see it from a positive side in our role of what we're trying to do, but also totally understand, you know, what's happening out in the real world, and how do we change that. And I think, you know, as you said, I think, you know, we spoke about it, and change for me is, you have to do it. Yeah. You have to do it. And that's the tough part.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, the doing is always the work, right? And again, when I started with acknowledgement, the emptiest, most dreaded room in the world is what? It's not the emergency room, it's not the school room, it's not the courtroom, it's the room for improvement. And how many of us want to step into that room, right? Particularly when we're talking about personally. Y'all went all personal. I thought we were here to talk about how everybody else can get better, not me. So let me do some self-indictment. I'm pretty good at it. I have to admit that even with my intentionality, so I'm in the fatherhood field, even with my intentionality of saying that fatherhood and motherhood are not the antithesis of one another. They're not contradictory, they're complementary. Even in that, there are still moments that I have to acknowledge that gender equity is not my priority all the time.
Yeah.
It's on my agenda, but it's not always my priority. I have to admit that. I followed your work. I listened to the last show with a longtime friend and partner in fatherhood. We've always had to, knew we had to have a DV and a partner violence component. Sister Darling, who was on the show last time, she's trained staff that I've worked alongside for many years in that area of partner violence, because we know it's important as we work with men to try to impart these principles on men and how to treat their wives and mothers of their children and their mothers and their daughters well. But even in so doing, I know when it relative to equity, there are other things that I'm the darkest thing on the set right now, right?
Yeah.
We had to adjust the lighting for me at the beginning of the set, right? There are some inequities that are prioritized in my mind, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
Am I saying that to dishonor my wife or the dear ladies that are friends in my life, my mother? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Again, it's that acknowledgement of where you are in your journey on this. And I think as we acknowledge and continue to be intentional, then we can get it right. And those that are seeking that acknowledgement and seeking to be lifted will honor you for that, right? Because I say stupid stuff in reference to this subject matter at times, just to be quite frank. But if they know my heart and they see me doing some stuff too, maybe not all of it, but doing some things right, I think there's that grace.
And I think that's, if you don't mind, before we come back to you, only because you open up a door that's obviously super relevant to me as well, which is being a black man in Kentucky, right? Or a black man anywhere in this country. And it's not just prioritizing, but sometimes you're literally in deficit where you feel the only thing you can see, the only battle that is imminent for you is being a black man and the inequities that you are dealing with. Do you think that's one of the things that makes it difficult for us to communicate this specific battle to men of color? Because I feel like that's what it is. I think it's some other things as well, but do you think that that's part of it? Yeah.
So all of our histories are part of our current reality, and for me, I think that is a phenomena that occurs, right? Because obviously African American males are marginalized in certain ways. I loved what Darlene said when you said to her last week, the other week, that I don't know the woman's plight. She said, well, you haven't walked as a woman in this country.
That's right.
And that resonated with me because those that haven't walked as who I am in this country, or who my colleagues and cohort is in this country. And as such, having not walked as a woman and having not walked as a black male, you can take those things that resonate with you and apply those principles. I do know what it means to feel inequities, right?
Yeah.
And so apply that. And I have to be coached and reminded of male privilege.
Yeah.
Black males have male privilege over females, no matter the race.
Yeah.
And I also adopted in my work something that's very helpful to me. There's a body of work by a brother named, I think it's Dr. Powell out of UC Berkeley. He did a primer in 2019 around a term called targeted universalism. You may have heard me speak of this before, but it's a principle that says you identify the most marginalized or the most challenging issue, address that. And in addressing that, you will be addressing other issues, inherently, right? So I used to wonder, how do they get those cars in showrooms at car lots? Because the doors look normal. Well, I figured out there are doors that open up and they drive them in. But they have to make the door big enough for the Hummer, the largest vehicle. Yeah. And if they make it big enough for the largest vehicle, obviously a small Tesla, will be able to get through that door. So that's targeted universalism. Some of the most marginalized people groups on earth or in this country are African Americans, but when you look at compounded issues, arguably it's the African American woman when we're looking at gender inequities, right? And which extends to all my sisters of any race. Yeah. And so that's one thing that helps root and ground me a little bit in reference to the racial inequities and the gender inequities. The principles and the pains are akin, and so if we can apply them one to another, we can relate one to another. Yeah. So I don't know where that leaves white men.
Well, I was about to say, because we're pivoting from the darkest brother on the set to arguably. Hey, Chris.
Are you talking about my hair? Is that thrown off?
I'm hair too.
Is that thrown off the white balance?
My segue game is, you know what I mean? But
that's all right.
No, but what do you kind of feel? Not just about what David and I are talking about, but just in general, as we continue to think about the work moving forward from a community perspective.
Well, I think this question of what can you do when you haven't walked in the shoes of the folks that you're thinking about, like, what's your role then? Where does it start? Where does it stop? I mean, those are pretty big questions. But I think one thing that you said that made me think back to what you mentioned initially. Well, why don't men sometimes deal with these issues? And I think there's a couple of reasons. One, it's uncomfortable, right, when you're talking about your own privilege or things that you know you're doing even as you're critiquing them, right? You know that somewhere, you're not walking the talk. You're there's always a discrepancy there. But I think also sometimes it's the fear of saying it the wrong way.
Yeah.
And that's, I think it's really important to shut up and listen a lot, especially if you're somebody in a privileged position. And probably everybody has some way in which they're that. Some of us have a lot of ways in which we're in those positions. So listening, of course, is going to be important, but ultimately you also have to take some action. And part of that is going to be talking about these things. And if you're paralyzed because you're afraid of using the wrong words or the wrong terms, then that, I think, is a net negative. Of course, it's important, the words that you use, and it's important that you learn how to talk about things in a way that's not going to increase the damage or that's not going to perpetuate some problem. Yeah, that you always learn. We need to create spaces where people can talk about this.
That's right.
And not
Safely.
Worry about getting it wrong, because
space,
we're all going to get it wrong initially. I mean, I'm a college professor. I'm an anthropologist. We study this stuff, and I talk about it all the time. I might be talking about it differently than somebody that doesn't deal with that. And I'm going to be talking about it differently maybe than somebody that deals with it more than I do or has different ideas about it. So part of, I think, the community healing is figure out how do you get these spaces available to people to explore these issues, because for a lot of us, the first time you hear about something, maybe you don't understand it. You don't get what it's about.
Yeah.
You may talk about it in a way that other people have moved past. Right.
And then sometimes it is what I think a lot of men suffer from. I know I do, is I think of a quarterback that has a play in his head and he drops back. But if his first read is shut down, there's a progression that he goes through, right? But I remember when I was playing quarterback when I was young, I was not good. If my first option was shut down, I'm taking off. I think a lot of men sometimes, when it comes to something new, right? We're talking 20, 30 years of a certain conditioning. So when I'm talking to my wife and she checks me on something, I'm built to take that check and to make an adjustment. But then when there's even more added nuance and 2 or 3 more steps, like I'm already coming out of my comfort zone to acquiesce to you checking me. But then when I do that, you saying, yeah, but don't do it that way. Then I start to get a little frustrated. And I wonder if that is because we're not exercising this out in the community more. Just throwing that out there, something that I've dealt with, because there's so many different layers, but we have to continue growing, I think is what you mentioned, because it doesn't stop. We continue to perfect ourselves. So language that might have been okay in 2022, in 2024, you can't say that anymore. So it's the constant work.
I'd just like to jump in there just to completely add a relevance to what you just said then. When you guys were talking about the shoes that you've had to walk in, and then you flipped it onto, I don't know about the white guy, I actually was then, I sort of tried to move that conversation on, because at that moment, I didn't know, I wouldn't want to say the wrong thing or do anything. And I felt that exact moment, and I feel I'm in the safest spot here ever with people that are talking openly and I'm listening. But exactly what you just said happened there, because I haven't walked it. I don't understand, but I do understand the importance and the relevance of what you guys were saying. So rather than, I could have maybe cracked a funny joke and that would have been even worse. So I immediately just sort of tried to push it on down the line from that point.
Yeah, real funny. Real funny. So you wouldn't know, having just met me, that I've been in reconciliation spaces. You wouldn't know that I've facilitated processes for creating safe space for even folks that have dealt with trauma to speak to race and equity and those things. And when you do that, it has to be pre-qualified, that you have license to share your confusion about the issue. You have license to share your trepidations as a white male, as a black male, and as our black females, white females, immigrant females. All of those have to have space to share their narrative.
That's right.
You know, and one thing that really articulates what community can do in reference to this and the women we're seeking equity for and trying to create a community that values that is when the suffrage statues were downtown, right? Mm-hmm. So this has gender, race, community action, and community advocacy, I should say, in the story. The statues were put up, we know, right?
Yeah.
And then there were a group of individuals that were very proud of that, because when women gained that right to vote, it was a beautiful time in the history of this country, a pivotal time. Mm-hmm. There were a group of African-American and white leaders that came together in this empathetic moment, one for another, in a safe space, and said that actually is doesn't truly depict the plight of women in voting, because black women did not get their vote when white women got their vote. Mm-hmm. So it speaks to those layers you're talking about. Yeah. And when we're trying to right such a mammoth issue in the human condition in this country, that is inequity towards our women and domestic violence prevention, we do have to be very intentional about looking at all of those layers and creating those spaces, and not talking in a circular way, but talking in a way that has some definitive action to it. And that was one in my mind that really resonates as definitive action. It includes all the elements we've discussed to this point. And
inclusive, right? That inclusivity, because essentially what we're talking about is being better human beings. Mm-hmm. And so even though those experiences, our experiences may be different, if we are all doing the work in a holistic way to be better humans, then what was the term you used? That was like a master's degree term, something universal. I don't know.
Yeah. Think of the paradox of it. Targeted universalism.
Yes.
You target the most marginalized, and it impacts universally.
Yeah. And so I think it's great that you brought that up. And I think this is a safe space, but I also think the anxiety that you felt, even in a safe place, illuminates and highlights what men feel, maybe when it comes to being open and honest about their trepidations when it comes to this, right? Yeah. So here's where I want to not even really pivot, but let's elevate this back to a community level, because I think we did what we were supposed to do. I think we have to come back in order to have this conversation outwardly, right? Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about from a community perspective, what has to be done tangibly, right? We're talking about work being done within, and that is easy for us to kind of control. Not necessarily control, but we're talking about us. But we're talking about the community. What are things that we can do, or the community as a whole needs to do, in order to amplify this work there?
Well, from my perspective, it's, there's going to be 100 different ways to do it, and it's going to be one of these ongoing tasks.
Give me a couple, not all 100. Give me a couple.
Well, for instance, being intentional about who you hire. Being intentional about who gets to speak, whose voices gets heard, being intentional about who's making decisions on what topics of conversation are, being valued. All of those things would, those aren't, particular actions, I suppose, but, and that may, there's 100 ways to do that.
Yeah.
But I think part of what you don't want to do is to imagine that you can come up with some solution that's just going to fix this and then you're done. Because it's going to be something that needs to be maintained, and the situation may completely change where one group that's marginalized may be not at some point. And, situations change for societies, but the work's never done.
No.
And, and I think that looking for that sort of recipe that allows you to just finish it, now you can move on to the next thing, that doesn't seem realistic.
No, and I agree, and I wouldn't even say finished. But what gets us on the right track towards that utopia that we're looking for? Because I think we're doing that work on the inside, and the work on the inside is never done. David, you talked about you're still battling things. I know I still battle things day in and day out. So I'm thinking of something like this. Now, this might be kind of controversial, but I'm just going to throw this out there. When I'm thinking systemic, when I am thinking community-wide, what about even the way that we vote? So what happens when, there's a specific candidate or party that you may universally vote for, right? But what happens when they are championing policies that are against women and their bodies, right? What are we doing there, and how does that shift the way that we vote? Because now we're talking systemic, we're talking policies, we're talking long-term things. And I know y'all done got tensed up. I know that's, politics ain't something but that's real though, right?
Yeah, certainly being responsive and making people answer questions and holding them to those answers, I think, would be part of that. We can come up with 100 excuses why somebody said this or that, or they didn't really mean it, or that's just a traditional way of thinking about these things or something. So I think that, one thing might be to sort of be a lot more critical to some of those things.
Yeah. What do you all think when we talk about?
Moving it to something that perhaps is more palatable and galvanizing than the word voting, I was thinking about how we support, right, in our community. We've got taken the asset-based approach at this thing. Look at our community here in Lexington and the brilliant women that we have in leadership roles. And we know that who we appoint and who we put in leadership and who we support in leadership makes a difference in our community. Yeah. I love the unapologetically woman that Sister Price does, right?
Yeah.
We've got family judges, we've got county attorneys, we've got mayors, we have legislature, we have a lieutenant governor, we have strong, brilliant, powerful women, and I don't even like putting those adjectives there as if it's an anomaly. That's normal, right? But I do want to adequately describe them in great places. The principal of Carter G. Woodson Academy, right?
That's right.
Strong woman, shout out. I think who we support and how we support. Yeah. And what I just did with my wife, shouted her out, right?
That's right.
Us lifting them up when we have seats, platforms, stages,
that's right.
Pulpits. My wife is part of this. My daughter holds me up in this work, right?
Yeah.
Not objectifying. You know what I'm saying? Those things are things we can do as individual men and the organizations we lead. I love that you are putting both programs on par. I would say, brother, even give yourself a license that if the Women's League needs an additional resource, because we know that equity is an inequality, and equality are not the same thing. Mm-hmm. So if we're talking equity, let's talk equity. So if they need to field longer than the fellas, they 100%. Get more field time than the fellas. 100%. You know what I'm saying? And so let's quit apologizing for being equitable, or let's not call it equity. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Let's call it just, I'm doing for them as well. Do that next best thing and what is needed to raise them up.
Yeah. Go ahead. You got something?
I agree. I feel like, as I said, listening to all of this, we talk about how we can do it and the reasons to do it. And I feel I'm sat here feeling very lucky and in a position to be able to be part of something that is new and huge in the community, and that is providing exact equal opportunity right the way down the middle. And we went back to how do we change? How do we do things? And I think that, as you said, organizations, key people, key movements, key all of that. For us, we're living that. I'm living that and feel very, very privileged to be in it, because as you've said, there would be nothing more exciting for our any one of our, I don't want to say a men's or women's, any one of our professional teams to win the league, and it should be celebrated in any way, the same way that we have young youth national team players coming through the female side and we don't have any on the boys side. I think that's absolutely fantastic, and credit to all the work that's going into the female game. And you know, we have an opportunity, and it's very much it's very much respected and honored to know that we have the opportunity to galvanize a community, because everywhere else around the world, dare I say it, you know, a football club is a real nucleus part of a community and how they do how we do things. And I think our role in our position is to be able to lead from the front and show the next generation, and us, it's all about the next generation. It's being built for generations and generations to come, to be able to come out and do that. So I think there are some real positives that are happening out there. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I think you all are leading in that. Go ahead, Chris.
And, you know, talking about the next generation, you know, as a college professor, of course, I'm dealing with young people all the time. And seeing the way those folks talk about things, seeing the way the young people that my kids were friends with in their high school, there's some real improvement there, you know. And so almost you feel like, let's just get out of their way.
Yeah.
Let's allow them to do these things that I see are happening, whether it's ideas about gender or race or
how people identify,
any sort of issue that we have. There are really remarkable changes, you know, from the time I was somebody that young to what I'm seeing in these people. I mean, we see all the time, you know, Gen Z or whatever the newest
I think one is. Another one.
You know, you know how they've ruined this and that. That's just not my experience. I mean, these every time I see see these people, it's like, thank goodness that you're the ones coming up.
And there's opportunity to still, because the consternation that one would have with such a statement would be, okay, just let anybody say what they want, means that I've got to waver from what I believe. Well, some of us do have some things we believe that need to be wavered. But you can have your basic tenets, principles, and morals stand where you stand and not be in someone else's way as well. You can love another without compromising your tenets. In fact, if you do love others, you're not going to be judgmental. You're not going to cast aspersions because someone's doing something differently. You're going to love and let that speak for it. And so I think we always have to say, when we're allowing for progress and evolution, that it's natural, there's that piece that we can hold on to personally that convicts us.
And I think that has helped to even strengthen my faith. Yeah. Because you know this, especially within the Black church, but really all churches, there is this intentionality on putting responsibility on men to lead, right? And so, you know, growing up, being a part of the church, you know, the narrative or the challenge, I don't want to say narrative, was as a man, you need to be doing X, Y, Z within your household, within your community, right? And so I was trying to reconcile that with this work that I'm doing that is about gender equality. And so where does this intentionality on my responsibility as a man within the community and my family coincide with this work that I'm doing that is also trying to get rid of some maybe toxic traits that could be disseminating from that, right? But it is actually, to what David said, if you're leading with love, right? I think there is a way to reconcile both of those things. And really it comes down to being a better human, not necessarily just a better man, but a better human being. And so I think it has really strengthened my faith. It has made me go into the word even more, you know, searching for those answers. But I think that is kind of what David is talking about. This has to be an authentic journey for the change to be real and true. We can't skip steps, or even when society says, Devine, you're not quite where you need to be. Okay, well, Devine's going to do the real work to get there. But I can't, with lip service, jump to where you say I'm supposed to be. That's not really where I'm at. I got to do the work and authentically work my way there. So through and through, I can truly be that model and example. And I'm kind of with Chris. I personally enjoy the work. I enjoy when my daughters come and say, Daddy, you can't say that no more. No, Daddy, it's this now. It's this. Oh, all right, well, here we go. You know what I mean? Because it just means I am being more of a fair and equitable person. No matter how frustrating it can be sometimes keeping up with the changes, I do kind of enjoy the journey. I must admit. Yeah.
I appreciate that. I will admit that my kids asked me to do some things and say how things are supposed to be, and I will say, I hear you, and I hear you. I regard you, and I respect you. I have a certain thought.
Yeah.
But I do that within the family, and I do that in the community as well. But I hope I'm never found guilty of mistreating someone because they have a different thought, perspective, or ideology. There's the difference. And when you create those spaces and move in that way, and that authenticity, your word, will shine through, they'll eventually, in communities, in organizations, in neighborhoods, and in homes, somebody say, hey, let me holler at you about something you said, right? Mm-hmm. Or I could say to them, let me speak. Can I ask you something about what you said, right? About gender equity and equality across gender. And that authenticity is what creates those spaces. But again, I think we have to give people space to be who they are, while also allowing for that evolution to occur in each one of us. So, man, I appreciate the things you say about authenticity, for sure.
Yeah.
And there's one more thing that occurs to me in all of this is that ultimately what I think doesn't really matter or doesn't improve people's lives. And all of this ultimately comes down to, setting yourself up so that you can actually do something that changes things. And those changes can be uncomfortable. And, if you're talking about redistributing power to people that have been, marginalized, I mean, not everything's a zero-sum game, but it might mean that it comes from somewhere. And I think that we have to get ready for that too. And you have, it's easy to say, I would like all of this negative stuff to change and my situation remain exactly the same. That would be really easy, but that may not be the way it's going to work. And I think that is another reality that that you have to face and say that, this is more important and I'm willing to do this.
And that kind of goes back to the voting question. Because when I look at my 23-year-old daughter, when I look at my wife, when I look at my mother, I got a tribe full of girls, by the way, at the crib. But when I look at them and they're saying, this issue means everything to me. This issue, it is, how do you respond to that, right? Like, because my daughter cries when she thinks about what the future holds for her because of some things that are happening on a much larger scale. So while we are talking about the community work and the work being done within, is it also our job to continue to apply pressure in bigger systems? We're talking systemically, right? Because even when I think of 2020 and what we were doing, everything wasn't just anecdotal. Everything just wasn't post on Facebook, right? We were wanting something more. We were charging systems for something larger, greater. And what I'm hearing from a lot of young ladies is they are requiring something more. And not to say we're just talking lip service. And I don't mean to keep harping on the voting thing, but just bigger, right? What are we willing to, when we talk about putting skin in the game, what are we willing to advocate for systemically when it comes to equality, when we're talking about gender or the issues that women, we've talked about listening to them, what they say is important to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think as an anthropologist, we always think about systems, and you think about structures and all of the things that create the realities that we have. That's exactly where you put the pressure, And so part of this work that you might do on yourself is to get yourself in a position where you're going to apply that pressure, where you're going to make that commitment, or where those sorts of things don't become something that you sometimes think about. It just becomes second nature. You see those inequitable systems, you feel those structures, and you say, that's not right, and I'm not going to support that, and I'm going to see what I can do. Now, of course, there's time for some people to be involved and other times for some people to step back. I don't know, so, that's a reality too. But yeah, I think you're right to identify those larger things are where the problem lies. But of course, those systems are made of people, and,
that's right.
The collective is made of individuals. So I think there's that balance.
So look, that's a good conversation. Let's kind of bring it home in the way that Sam and I always do, because we're always thinking of what you've talked about a lot today is next generation. So with the journey that we've been on, and a lot has changed. I'm 43. I'll be 44 here in a couple weeks. David is in his 70s. You obviously been around for a while, and so.
Don't take it, David.
I just want him to step to 70.
Yeah, no.
70
See,
step.
well, I don't want no problems. I know you marched with Dr. King, and so that's a different level of. I don't want no issues. Still stepping, but a lot has changed, right? Since even I was a child, right? What advice are we giving to that 16, 17-year-old young man? On how to continue this work moving forward, right? We talked a lot about learning from young people, right? But there's still some gaps. There's still things we can provide from a systemic, from a wisdom standpoint. So I want each of you to think about, and whoever wants to go first can go first. That's why I'm asking this question slow, so you can be thinking. But what advice are you giving that 16, 17-year-old on how to continue this movement of gender equality moving forward?
Since the elder has been established,
clearly, indeed.
The advice that I would give, it's not incongruent with what we've talked about. If I'm telling a young man, I'm talking about, I'm glad you brought out redistribution of power, but not only the redistribution of power, but distribution of prestige, distribution of regard, distribution of respect. I hope our young men are able to move in a way that they will enlist the best person for the task. And oftentimes that's a woman in our communities. Oftentimes that's a woman. And I hope they will take what I've just recently learned, an empire approach versus a kingdom approach versus an empire approach. Empire says there's not enough, and so therefore there's not enough for everybody. So to give away, that you were talking about, is a challenge. Kingdom says there's more than enough. Empire says I cannot surrender. I can't give away. Kingdom says that's how I gain, is by giving away. Empire says it's got to be me. Kingdom says it's us. And so that's what I would teach to, young folks, and mine included, the young men in my household, the men in programs that I've led, and the men in programs we're seeking to replicate across the state. Start with respect for women, looking at how they interface with their mother as a child, and now them as an adult, how they interface with the women in their life, respect, regard, are faithful, and have fidelity with. And then moving ahead, how they raise their daughters and raise their sons to respect other women. That's a fundamental principle of our programs, and so I try to exercise those, and even in my household, and those that I have some personal touch on.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I would say for me, it would be a couple things. I think one is I would tell young people to diversify the circles that they enter. I know a lot of young people go into college and you join clubs and you find friend groups and circles. A lot of times we join spaces that connect to maybe interest or where we feel our gender roles lie. So if I'm a freshman in college, I'm probably not going to join a group that's centered around advocacy against domestic violence, because in our minds we're told, well, that's a girls group, right? But it might actually be good to get in some of those spaces that you feel aren't for you, so you can gain some more, perspectives at a younger age. And even within their friend circles, I would challenge young people to do that. And I think the second thing is to always think big picture. You both, all three of you, kind of mentioned this in different ways, but we can't take our foot off the gas. I think 2020 showed us that, right? That we fought for all of these changes. We were getting all these chain emails from different retailers. They were shifting laws and policies, and they created positions at universities. And here we are 3-4 years later. Not only did they take all of that away, but they're even trying to take more. And I think part of that is collectively we took our foot off the gas. And so I would tell this next generation that kind of what you said, it's never ending. There is no end, and okay, we can just sit back and relax. Just like the work we do internally, we have to apply that pressure to the public and to the community continuously. So I think that would be my advice.
I think I would, if I were talking specifically to young men, one of the things you might make sure that folks are thinking about is that these changes don't represent you losing something. This inequity that seemed to be this advantage for you ultimately is not an advantage. Ultimately, you're paying the price for that. And
that's good.
And you need to understand that you're not at risk of losing something that's worth keeping.
Yeah.
And this is, of course, going to apply to any of these issues, right? If you're in a privileged position and it's unfair, making it fair is not losing something. Ultimately, you're going to gain from that.
That's right.
And I think that's an important way to look at it. So I think that would be a big thing for me. Another big thing would be that, to really suggest that it's not actually important that you understand some of these changes. You don't need to get it. You don't need to agree with it exactly, or you don't need to shape your life around those things. That it doesn't require that. It's much more about not putting forth or not creating a situation where people have to adhere to what you think. And so I think those would be the couple of things I would probably talk about.
That's good. That's good.
Again, I'm listening to all of your information and trying to pick out pieces that haven't already been said. And I think for me, the way my brain works is that I would just simplify it down to the fact that I think at 16, 17 years old, if I'm talking to a 16, 17-year-old young man, I would still class that as a young boy. Yeah. And I know how we all have that inner child inside us, and just try to express to that person that you are going to make some mistakes, but they do not define you in any way whatsoever. That if you can grow and if you can accept the difficulties that happen, and that's not a reflection of who you are and what you do, and try and tackle that male sort of boy into man ego to be able to not have to go and take on the world. And I just think that I would want them to know that, whatever they're doing, do it to their best of their ability, get up every day and work as hard as you possibly can to change the things around you and look after the people around you that are close to you. I think the big picture is fantastic, and go and take on the world. But that starts with yourself, and understanding how you are and what you want to become. And then to just continue to surround yourself with people, good people, good mentors, as best as you possibly can, and be open and be able to talk, which I think is the hardest thing to do as a young man, and maybe admit your fears or admit your vulnerability or admit that. And I think the generation now is very good at that and expressing themselves and talking about that better than we all were. I think it was a shut shop and we used to talk about that. And I would tell them to continue to explore their vulnerability inside them to then help them help others.
Yeah. Whew. Good stuff, guys. I think this episode has been great, man. I think having the perspective of, you know, an archaeologist, you know, having one of the original abolitionists, having a, go on, sip your water, having a coach, we, you know, all jokes aside, fellas, I think this was a great conversation. I think it's needed. I think we got to figure out a way to have these conversations out there a little bit more. And maybe this podcast is the beginning. I've been doing this for a little over 2 months, and I feel like I learned something every episode. And I learned quite a bit in this episode. There's some things I need to process, some things I need to research and look up. But I truly thank you all for this conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Fantastic.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you for joining us for the Good Guy Guide. We hope you gained a new perspective, a call to action, or maybe just a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a world where respect, equality, and kindness is essential. Remember, change starts with each of us. So let's continue the conversation, challenge our assumptions, and most importantly, let's be the change that we want to see. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with somebody that needs to hear this message. Tune in next time as we dig deeper into the issues that matter, bringing you more insights and stories to inspire positive change. Until then, stay informed, stay energized, keep doing your part to make the world a better place. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Good Guy Guide. Peace.
Woo!